now about the third fighter that I flew in my career, the Tornado air defence variant, or the Tornado F2, which later became the Tornado F3. Prior to that, I had flown Lightnings and I'd flown the Phantom, so it was a natural progression to go and fly the Tornado. And I should add that each of those aircraft, the Phantom was a quantum leap forward from the Lightning, and the Tornado was a quantum leap forward in many ways from the Phantom. But the purpose of this talk now is talking about the Tornado. The Tornado was procured for the Royal Air Force as a fighter, as an interceptor, because the primary job was to intercept Russians approaching the UK. The fact that the Cold War came to an end and we moved into a much newer era involved with expeditionary warfare and in different parts of the world means that we need an aircraft that can do combat as well. Well, the Tornado could do combat. It wasn't designed as a combat specialist, but it is very capable at combat, as I shall talk as we go through. But it was designed as an interceptor to go and intercept Russians hundreds of miles away from the UK. So it had to be an aircraft with the legs to do that, capable with the weapon capability to do that, and in the modern era to deal with the modern technology. I already mentioned that the Tornado was a quantum leap forward. It was, first thing I'll say is it relied on computers. It had a main computer. When I first flew the very first Tornado variant, it had a very small computer of 64 kilobytes, which was then increased to 128 kilobytes and then up to 200 and something kilobytes, and then it's been exponentially increasing ever since. But it was relied on a main computer. Associated with that, there was something like 18 other computers in the aircraft running all sorts of things, small things and big things. So it was very much a computerized aircraft. It was also a fly-by-wire aircraft. The aircraft itself was a tri-nation one. It was built by Britain, Germany and Italy working together. All had tri-nation agreements. They'd all agreed to take so many aircraft as far as work share was concerned. For example, the UK had responsibility for wings or part of the wings and a variety of other things. They all shared it and they'd all put it together, and it all worked quite well, but it was fairly cumbersome exercise in many ways. Because first of all, if you've got a three-nation aircraft, you're going to get three-nation agreement. The fighter version of the Tornado was really a development of the bomber version, which was procured again for the three nations. The fighter version was not procured for three nations. The fighter version initially was procured solely for the UK. In actual fact, the Italians did operate the fighter version of the Tornado, which was mainly on loan from the UK in later years, but that was not the intention. Another country that flew the Tornado fighter version was Saudi Arabia. As well as the main computer, the other unique characteristics of this aircraft were it was swing wing, and the wings you could put into 4 different positions. 25 wing was fully forward, then there was 45 wing, which was obviously further back, 53 degree swept wing and 67 degree swept wing. With the wings forward, it obviously was designed for the slower end of the speed envelope, and with the wings back was really designed for the very high speed end when you're supersonic or very high speed subsonic. So I liked personally I liked very much the wing sweep characteristics of the aircraft. It was very simple to operate, and it gave a lot of added benefits. It also had other devices. For example, with 25 wings selected, we could select what we call manoeuvre flap, which would significantly enhance the manoeuvre of the aircraft. I mentioned briefly sort of it had fly-by-wire. It had a quadruple backup system of fly-by-wire, which really relied on sort of messages. There were no wires there. But it did have a mechanical backup. So in the extremely unlikely event that you lost all 4 fly-by-wire channels, you could sort of put the aircraft into a mechanical system and fly it with mechanical backup. We used to train for that quite regularly as well, although I don't recall we ever had to use it. The aircraft it also had thrust reversers down the back end, so it was fairly unique there. This gave the aircraft sort of on the, you'd land and you'd operate the thrust reverser just like an airliner, and the reverse thrust, you could stop the aircraft very quickly on the ground. That was in place of the tail parachute that we used to have on the Lightning and also the Phantom. The slight drawback with the thrust reverse system was it was quite a heavy system, so you had a weight penalty to it. On the weapon side, the aircraft did carry ultimately the AMRAAM medium range missile and the ASRAAM short range missile, very, very capable missiles. And it had an integral gun, Oerlikon gun, 27mm, which was very, very accurate indeed. The fact that it had 8 missiles, 4 heat-seeking and 4 radar-guided, which was exactly the same as what the Phantom had. The difference between the Phantom and the Tornado was the Tornado had AMRAAM and ASRAAM, which were much more capable missiles. Another major capability advantage of the Tornado was that it had a data link system. That system actually wasn't put into all Tornado F2s and 3s. There was only a number equipped with that capability. I think it was 2 squadrons. But the data link system gave a huge capability as far as you could communicate via data link with airborne early warning AWACS aircraft, with other Tornadoes. You could operate a formation of Tornadoes, for example, hundreds of miles apart on data link. And of course you could communicate with the ground. It was known as the JTID system, Joint Tactical Information Distribution System. It was a very capable system and gave significant advantage to the aircraft. On the radar side, it had, performance-wise, it had technically sort of a next generation of radar initially it had problems with the radar, but these problems were progressively overcome until when the aircraft sort of finally went out of service after 25 years. Unfortunately, it was the latter part, the second half of its time in service, when the radar really came into its own. It was an exceedingly capable radar, and the big thing about the radar was that you had the ability to what they call track while scan. So you could keep the radar scanning away while you were tracking aircraft, and you could actually track 10 different aircraft at the same time. So as far as sort of setting up a picture of what was going on out there, a situational awareness picture, it was very useful. To help all that, you would have we had TV screens. In the front we had one TV screen, which in the back there were 2 TV screens, and on one TV screen would be the radar, and the other TV screen would probably be the situational awareness. You could, through all the computers, the information that was being fed around the system and linked in with the radar as well, you could sort of show exactly sort of what the airspace looked like outside, but see it on the TV screen. You could see on the TV screen where the aircraft were in relation to where you are out there, where other aircraft are, so you could build up an air picture much more easily than anything I'd flown before. And it was an exceedingly useful useful capability to have. By the time the aircraft went out of service, for example, the aircraft used to go to red flag in Las Vegas area, sort of Nevada desert, sort of fairly regularly, and used to perform very well against all modern capabilities. I know the Americans were very surprised at the how well the Tornado F3 acquitted itself against their highly capable aircraft they had. They were impressed with the Tornado by that stage. They wouldn't have been impressed with it right at the start, but as I say, we did have problems at the start. The few other little things, I'm jumping around a bit now, avionic-wise, we had a radar homing and warning receiver. We had a missile management system, again, that was computer-based. In the cockpit, we had a head-up display, exceedingly good head-up display. Head-up display meaning you could have your head out of the cockpit all the time. All the instruments that one had got accustomed to previous aircraft seeing in the instrument panel, we still had the instrument panel there, you could still see the instruments there, but you could see exactly the same in the head-up display, not depicted slightly differently. And you'd also get all the weapon pictures sort of coming up in the head-up display as well. So you could basically keep your head out of the cockpit where you would see other aircraft, you had your looking all the time, rather than having to sort of share your time between outside and having a quick glance inside, etc., etc. So head-up display was really, really good. Like the Phantom, the Tornado had an angle of attack. It worked on angle of attack. We used to fly angle of attack on the approach, and we had angle of attack limits. Not to say we didn't fly the speed as well, we did. We knew what speed was happening there always, and it was always depicted on the head-up display anyway. You could see your angle of attack, you could see your speed, you could see your G, you could see your attitude, you could see everything. And we also had another system called SPILS, Spin Prevention and Instant Limiting System. This meant that through the system you had effectively carefree handling. And believe me, the Tornado F2, F3 did handle very well. The cockpit was ergonomically good. Environmentally, it was the best cockpit that I flew in any aircraft in my career. Very comfortable environment, and it felt comfortable. The whole thing felt comfortable in there. The aircraft itself flew beautifully. It was beautifully harmonised controls. It was a real delight to fly. And I really enjoyed my time flying the Tornado. I enjoyed flying all the aircraft I've flown, but for different reasons. Performance-wise, the Tornado was in many ways similar to the previous fighters I'd flown, the Lightning and Phantom, in that its top speed, in Mach terms, which is normal, relates to the speed you fly at height, was in the order of Mach 2 plus. In airspeed terms, which really relates to the thicker air, more dense air, which you encounter at the lower levels. The Lightning, for example, used to be limited to around about 650 knots. That was because of surge problems in the intake. The Phantom, I recall, we used to fly, had a limit of something like 750 knots. Well, the Tornado was the hottest of the lot. It had a limit of 800 knots. And there's no doubt about it that 800 knots, it could go faster than that. It was a hot ship at low level. Because, of course, you plug in the burners, the aircraft would just jump away from you. As it decelerated, you sweep the wings back until you had the wings back at 67 degree wing. And then it was like a dart, quite frankly, just like a dart. And it would really roar away. 800 knots was not a problem. And when you pull the aircraft out of burner, it was like hitting a barn door, in fact, because it would just stop immediately. And in fact, you'd be thrown forward in your seat, and you were strapped in, so you could feel the effect of the deceleration taking place. It was very impressive, and in fact, we used to, on demonstration flights, for example, we would set up the aircraft at say 250 feet over the sea, 250 knots, and say, now watch this, and sort of plug in the reheat, and like I said, the aircraft would just launch itself, and something like 20-25 seconds later you were doing 650 knots. That's how quick it was. Really, really impressive. On the engine front, the engines were really designed for the lower levels. The Tornado F2, F3 was derived from the bomber version of the Tornado, and so where the engines, which were very much designed for the bomber role, so the engines were very much designed for the low-level role in the Cold War days. And so the engines were very good down there. They were equally good in the supersonic environment at high level. But they did tend to run out of puff in the medium levels, just because of the way the engines were. Unlike the Lightning, where the engines were superb at all heights. And when we flew Phantoms, the RAF Phantom was designed in a similar way, best performance at low level. And then when we got a squadron of American Phantoms, the F4J, then it had American engines in it, and again the American engines were designed for better performance at all levels. So that was a slight deficiency that we had to, well, it was a deficiency we had to deal with in the Tornado F3. You might be interested to know, for example, that when Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait in 1990, and I was actually the very first commander out into the Gulf Theatre after that, and I straight away within 24 hours of arriving I had 2 squadrons of Tornado F3s down there, and they were flying operational missions literally half an hour after they'd arrived. That's how quickly sort of we did it. But because they were operating in the Middle East, and because the engines were one area that we felt that we needed to get other engines. So actually back in the UK, on other Tornadoes, we borrowed some engines which were better performers at all levels, and installed them in the Tornado F3s, which were taking other modifications as well, specifically sort of designed for the Middle East theatre, which of course on that particular occasion was exceedingly hot in every way. Before those aircraft, once they'd been modified and the aircrew had trained on them and got used to them, they were brought out to replace the 2 squadrons that I had there already. That's just one example of what one can do, I suppose. Sort of, there's always things you can do in any environment, and that throughout the Tornado's life, it was continually being sort of improved, upgraded. The brains that we had amongst the aircrew, not just the aircrew, but aircrew and industry, were great brains, and working together, some wonderful sort of innovative modifications came up and were put on the aircraft, which help improve things. The Tornado was a very, very capable aircraft. Like I said, it was lovely to fly. Give you one example. Looping wise, we used to, when the aircraft first came into service, we used to teach people to loop it, I think it was 350, 360 knots. And it used to go over sort of the top, well, that was from 5,000 feet, shall we say, and it would go over the top of the loop at something like 10,000 feet. But actually, you could just as easily loop the aircraft, and I used to do it to show people you could loop the aircraft from 250 knots, and it would do it just as effectively. It was an aircraft that you could really sort of, you could show the good characteristics. I think people as an aircraft, people used to love flying it. There were aspects of the performance that I say that did cause some people concern. Certainly those pilots who came from Lightnings, and I came from Lightnings, but I've been on the Phantom in between. But because they were coming from a single seat to a 2-seat environment, that like I've always said, it does take a bit of time getting used to the 2-seat environment if you come from a single seat environment. And certainly I think, and I understand it entirely, Lightning pilots who would have preferred to be sort of back in the single seat environment, rather like Typhoon is back in the single seat environment. But then with the capability at the time that we had on the Phantom and then the Tornado, really to get maximum effectiveness out of the aircraft, we needed to have it operating in the two-seat environment. I think the operations we did was sort of very similar to what we'd done with the Phantom. The aircraft was responsible for the air defence of the United Kingdom, an area sort of that was not just the United Kingdom, but covered an even bigger amount of airspace out over the sea, going way north of the UK, and that's what we used to police. So we used to exercise in there. Obviously, we used to train. We trained before the Cold War ended. We were obviously training for the Cold War environment, which was training to meet the hordes that were then come across from the east. And by the time they got to the UK, they actually would have gone through the first line of defence, which was in Germany, which is where I was with the Lightnings from the start. And the second line of defence, you could say, was meeting the fighters in the UK. Or it was contending with the bombers that were coming around from Russia to launch their standoff weapons. So the Cold War was a different environment. And then, of course, which the Tornado was well designed to do. Things like air-to-air refuelling were day-to-day, just like close formation, battle formation, instrument flying, night flying, air-to-air refuelling, and working with airborne early warning aircraft was day-to-day bread and butter operations. Working with NATO was a day-to-day bread and butter operation. We were very much part of NATO, and we used to fly with and against NATO countries all the time, visit NATO countries all the time, and just get used to working together, so that when we had to sort of work together in a hostile environment, we could do it. And obviously that again helped quite a lot sort of when we went into the first Gulf War and other expeditionary events that have taken place since, where you find yourself working in a coalition, working in a NATO environment. A lot of the aircraft you find yourself working with in coalition are NATO aircraft anyway, so it all helps. So you get used to working with other nations, you get used to travelling around the world, and we deployed because part of our job was to be able to sort of deploy at very short notice anywhere in the world, global reach. And I did my longest sortie ever in a Tornado, which was 10.5 hours flying from Lincolnshire, taking off at 11 o'clock at night, and arriving in Oman at a place called Mazira at 9:30 in the morning with a sore bum. But I'm pleased to report that I had not required to use the toilet once in that 10.5 hours, which I was quite impressed by. Wasn't always the case, but I won't go into what we had for doing that sort of thing. That's probably the subject of another talk. I think I have very happy memories of the Tornado as an aircraft. I wanted to fly it long before it came into RAF service. I wanted to be the first commander of the first Tornado unit, and I made enough noise to get my message heard, obviously, because I was posted to introduce the Tornado fighter version into RAF service, to command the first unit and squadron. I got what I wanted, and out of that sort of followed a long association with the Tornado, which lasted 10 years. I served that as introducing the aircraft, flying the aircraft, displaying the aircraft, commanding a squadron, commanding a base, having responsibility for all aspects associated with management of the aircraft from the Ministry of Defence perspective. And that's, for example, where I found that job interesting. In that one, working, I would say, with and against industry, because I used to be surprised at some of the meetings I'd go to when I was in London associated with the Tornado, and the confrontational styles that I would see sort of adopted between industry and the Ministry of Defence did not impress me, I have to admit. Neither did I used to go to Munich quite a lot, because the Tornado was managed from Munich, being a tri-nation aircraft. And I used to go down there to various meetings, in particular to do with modifications, and I saw for myself the time it takes to get three nations to agree to modifications. It just lengthens all the time for everything in sort of bringing aircraft in. But that was the way it was. There are great positives about working sort of in a tri-nation, or as with Typhoon, quadruple nation. But there are one or two drawbacks as well, and sometimes the time in doing things can be that drawback. The Tornado will always be an aircraft that is special to my heart. Like, not quite as special as the Lightning, but special in different ways. I did so much with that aircraft. I saw so much, and I have so many memories of my time with that, and in particular what we achieved with the aircraft. I'm very proud of what the aircraft achieved, and it's interesting because I've several times talked about the aircraft at other talks where well-known personalities have also talked about their time on the Lightning and the Phantom and the Tornado. And one particular occasion, I remember sort of a good friend of mine who was, like me, another very sort of passionate Lightning pilot, but when asked which aircraft would you prefer to go to war out of the Lightning, Phantom and Tornado, and he unequivocally answered Tornado, when I half expected him to say Lightning. But of course the Lightning didn't have the wartime capability of either of those aircraft. And I can only agree with him. If you ask me which of those three aircraft I would prefer to go to war with, it would have to be the Tornado. And I think that is how I would sort of sum up my memory. And I know I've skipped over so much, I haven't gone into detail. I've talked about what's come into my head and just let it flow. So I'm sure I've missed things out, and if I have, I apologise if I've got things wrong. I hope I haven't got too much wrong, but suffice to say, great aircraft.